Hey, welcome back to the Joe Silverback Show. Today, this conversation is going to be about a response to a dialogue between Yuval Noah Harari, historian, philosopher, Hebrew University genius with two bestsellers, *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, engaged in a interview, debate, discussion with Fei Fei, PhD professor, Stanford, human-centered artificial intelligence, computer science engineer, and the editor of Wired magazine. Good God Almighty, excuse me, Nicholas Thompson, I believe. Interviewing them, and one of the themes that came up that I think is really profound in all of this, and let me just start off by first of all saying, breathe in, breathe out. And I'm doing that for myself as much as for you guys and as a rhetorical piece. But one of the things that I do find comforting and heroic about Harari is that he does make it very clear that he's a meditator, and I believe that he meditates 2 hours a day. And he does make it clear that without his meditation, just his super, genius brain, I think, would do him in. And I think also the topics that he's dealing with in terms of looking at AI and technology and all of that. 30 to 60 days, he takes a retreat, a meditation retreat, so that ties in with the solitude and quietude that I'm always talking to you guys about, that nature inside and nature outside must be in balance and harmony. Now, the second thing that came across in this discussion was the less anxiety-driven Fei Fei as an engineer mind, to what I see in Yuval Noah Harari as the philosopher, historian, and as I see in the journalist Nicholas Thompson, editor of Wired and previous Stanford alum, I believe. And what I see in myself and what I see in all of us is that we're worked up about something that we're very uncertain about, and it creates a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And a lot of that fear and a lot of that anxiety is reason-based, because we don't have any clue as to what's coming. Now, one of the things that came up also in this was that Nicholas Thompson was saying to Fei Fei, hey, I just love how 5 years ago, all the AI people were saying it's so powerful, it's much more powerful than everybody thinks, and now today they're saying, oh, it's not as powerful as everybody thinks. And Fei Fei's response was, yeah, that's because 5 years ago nobody knew anything about it, and so we had to bring them into it, educate them, and now we know so much more about it, and maybe we're less fearful of what we have familiarity with. And there's a lot of positive energy that I got out of this interview, and why I recommend you guys going to YouTube and watching this, because I do believe that it's important to see all sides of the argument and still come out very concerned about the questions that are being brought up. Artificial intelligence is intelligence that it already exists. that man is creating, that is not born of nature and is not evolved over eons of evolutionary history to go through the weeding out process. And so for the first time in human evolutionary history, as E.O. Wilson points out, we now have the ability to, and as Harari points out, and my guess is Harari was deeply influenced by E.O. Wilson's work, we now have the ability to be in charge of the next level of human manipulation. So we've had this slow evolutionary process, and then over the last 500 years it started to speed up, and then industrialization and democracy brought genetic interbreeding to a point where today it's harder and harder to identify any one person with a particular culture, a particular race, a particular ethnicity. I know identity politics is huge, and people are becoming more identified in some ways, but that's probably because there's these lines are blending and merging, and that we just, we're scared and we're unclear, and we're taking positions because this early reptilian brain and this early mammalian brain and this early monkey brain and this primate brain is freaking out about holding on to territory. And I don't have any answers in terms of ethnicity, culture, and race. What I do believe is that there's a lot of good in just relaxing about that, in terms of understanding that Fei Fei is Chinese female heading up human-centered artificial intelligence at Stanford University, one of the top universities in the world, in the heart of Silicon Valley. Yuval Noah Harari is at Hebrew University, and he's a gay white man, and he's a bestseller for 2 brilliant novels. I think these are adequate indicators of the gender and the racial and the ethnic intermixing that biologists and sociobiologists and evolutionary historians are clearly aware of, that contemporary story that we get from nightly news isn't going to tell us, or that we get from prehistoric ideas in academia. That to me is a good thing. The good thing to be human-centered and not be thinking about that. And you can't be thinking about that when you're looking at evolutionary history and AI. Because nature is bigger than ethnicity. Nature is bigger than race. Nature is bigger than culture. And none of it really matters. None of it really matters. What matters is being a good human being. What matters is bringing deeper consciousness into the decision making that's going on, that's going to impact each one of us as human beings. It's going to impact our mothers, our fathers, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and all down the line. And we need to get over ourselves and come together in a more rational and enlightened way. And this conversation that they were presenting is pretty powerful dialogue and conversation. And these dialogues that we're continuing to have, on YouTube are are also brilliant and enlightening. And the borders and the boundaries and everybody's understanding that, whether it's capitalist society or whether it's communist society or whether it's, classical communist society versus current day communist, current day, let's take China for example, communist China moving into capitalist China with authoritarian China over it, or authoritarian, Russia, and its own interaction in capitalism, or democratic, non-authoritarian capitalist societies in the West. All of us, we don't have the answers, and we just are trying to hit some midpoints in between all of this that help us make more sane decisions. And the decisions can only be made when we understand the questions, and the questions can only be understood when we ask them. And so I'm going to ask you guys again a couple questions. I want you to think about love, and I want you to think about compassion, and I want you to think about caretaking. And I want you to think about your own mother. Unless you have a really traumatic experience, if you have a relationship like I did with my mother, which is one of somebody who gave her life so that I could have life, and one whose nurturing qualities and caretaking qualities were there until the day she died, I deeply loved my mother, and I am now confronted with this idea of artificial intelligence being a caretaker of my mother, as opposed to myself being a caretaker, or my sisters, or anybody else human that we might hire to come in and help her, or my father. Now, I want you to ask that question, and I want you to ask the question about with your children. Do you want to buy a machine that can babysit your child, and rock your child, and tell your child stories, and contact you if your child's temperature is going up? Do you want that? I don't want you to have that. I believe authoritatively that that is a dangerous position to take. I am scared to death of people who will use AI to replace human beings to take care of their children. That's one area that I don't ever want to see AI enter. And we're already doing it. We're already babysitting our children with all of the technology that we have. Do you want AI? Do you want some programmed algorithm to tell you what to do, how to think, how to behave, when to take your medicine, when to pee, when to poop, when to go out, when not to go out, when to go take a risk, when not to take a risk? The same with your children. We've talked about risk-taking in childhood. It's a great, great part of the expanding consciousness of childhood, which is learning to be discreet about and make decisions about very important things. And we can't do that unless a child just jumps and falls flat on his face, and then gets up and jumps and falls flat on his face, and then gets up and jumps and lands on his feet and goes, interesting. I'm with my son and my grandson the other day, and it's very interesting being a grandfather, and I watched this kid run and just slide on his knees on with his pants on the brick. Now, he probably saw this at my son's house on TV with, Ronaldo or Messi or some great soccer player sliding, and he was trying it. He didn't think about it. He didn't feel any pain. And my son was like, no. Sorry, Joshua. Sorry, but you baby the guy. And all parents, of course, have that. I'm laughing right now, but this same son of mine, you know, I mean, he was 10 years old and he was running on a wall with jagged rocks and he slipped and he slit his knee wide open. So we all have this self-protective quality, and we also have this, we gotta let them go and experience and falling on their face and, you know, touching a sharp knife and doing this and that. Of course, we don't have them take a handful of water and go stick it into, you know, electrical socket. But risk-taking is a part of it. How much do we want our lives controlled? What's the role of AI that's adequate for human beings, and what's the role of AI that's dangerous? We all know the answer to a lot of these questions. We need to start participating in the conversation. Otherwise, you're going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and you're going to have a world for your children and grandchildren that you're going to say, wow, how did we get here? Okay, tune in to the discussion. Yuval Noah Harari in conversation with Fei Fei Li and Nicholas Thompson of Wired. Talk to you guys soon.